Fashion has played a central role in the lives of the American people, no matter the time period. Through the decades, fashion has transformed gender roles, cultural norms, and social standards. While each period of American history displays many of its own shifts in fashion, in this film we are focusing on the 20th century, a time when fashion changed drastically for women due to the events and inventions that affected it. Let's begin with how fashion impacted America in the 1910s. Many changes in America influenced the way in how fashion was produced. The noticeable change in consumer culture, due to the invention of the assembly line in 1913, made fashion more widely accessible since it was mass-produced. Since products were becoming less expensive, women began to own more clothing. Lower-class women could now mimic upper-class fashion, something that had never been seen previously. Before the invention of the assembly line, all clothing had to be produced by hand, which took time and made elaborate trends expensive and hard to obtain for most Americans. In addition to the assembly line, the creation of the bikini in 1913 sparked controversy. Bikinis were intended to enhance the performance of women Olympians. Since women were expected to cover themselves and be modest, wearing the little amounts of clothing caused a scandal among many. While the creation of the assembly line and bikini provided many positive changes, the beginning of World War I in 1914 negatively impacted the fashion industry. As the war began, attention and resources previously focused towards fashion were now directed towards more critical issues. And now we will transition to the 1920s, dubbed the Roaring Twenties. By the time World War I had ended, women were used to the feeling of independence and freedom because their husbands were off at war, and their clothing echoed the sense of wartime masculinity because of this. Another major event that caused a large shift in fashion was the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Women were now joining the workforce more than ever before, and the new fabrics led fashion into a more modern phase. While many people believe flappers emulated the entire decade, the flapper did not fully emerge until 1926. Flappers represented rebelliousness and modernity. They cut their hair short, exposed their legs to the public, smoked cigarettes, and drank in public despite the prohibition of alcohol. The style of clothing flappers wore was extremely attainable for American women, since they were easy to make at home. Designer Gabrielle Coco Chanel was extremely popular throughout the 1920s and is still widely recognized today for her signature style. Another reason why flapper dresses became popular was due to the invention of the radio. The radio played music in people's homes, which led to dancing. Women wanted to look as young as possible, and the style of clothing provided this. In the 1930s, the Depression era greatly impacted what women wore. Fewer accoutrements because of money shortage meant fewer clothing items bought by the public. During this time, many women escaped the havoc of the time through the Hollywood film industry. What celebrities wore in these movies became the glamorous medium for fashion in the 1930s. Film stars dazzled in long bias-cut gowns, while women at home wanted to dress the same but couldn't afford it. This style of clothing was an escapism from the problems faced at home. Also, as another war seemed imminent, clothing began to reflect the military style through functional square shoulders. New techniques for mass production carried over for the creation of ready-to-wear fashion in the incoming era.
The dominant style of the 1940s was utility clothes, characterized by squared shoulders, narrow hips, and hems below the knee. This style was modeled after the clothes produced because of rationing during World War II. Designers faced many challenges due to rationing. Belt loops and pockets weren't allowed, and each garment was only allowed a certain amount of fabric. World War II also had different effects on the fashion of the time. Prior to the war, the biggest fashion influencers and designers came from Paris. France fell to Nazi Germany in 1940, weakening the supply of French couture to the States. This created a vacuum in the fashion industry and allowed for designers from the United States to rise in prominence and for the U.S. to create its own identity in the fashion world. The 1950s meant the transition into the post-war era. Fabric rationing was over, which meant there was more freedom to design new fashion. The 1950s was influenced by Christian Dior's New Look from 1947. The new look was defined by unpadded, rounded shoulders, shapely bust lines, defined waistlines, and full skirts to make a more feminine look. Coco Chanel countered this look with boxy suits and slim skirts named the Chanel suit, which continued to be popular in later decades. Polyester, acrylic, and spandex fabrics were invented, which increased production speed and made clothes easier to take care of. This made the newest trends easier to access and afford for the public. Fashion icons at the time include Brigitte Bardot, Audrey Hepburn, Marilyn Monroe, and Grace Kelly. Housewives strived to look like these icons because the appearance of the wife was linked to her husband's success. The better the wife looked, the wealthier the family was perceived. In the 1960s, women started to drift away from the idea of a perfect American housewife. Mary Tyler Moore was an actress who played the role of housewife Laura Petrie on The Dick Van Dyke Show. She was the first woman to regularly wear pants on TV, which helped advance the image of TD women to a more realistic view that reflected the change in fashion at the time. However, the most influential fashion icon of the 60s was First Lady Jackie Kennedy. She was the face of the nation, and women strived to look like her. Jackie Kennedy is credited with popularizing pillbox hats, elbow-length gloves, strapless gowns, headscarves, and oversized sunglasses. The White House was not the only influential fashion force during this time. Feminism also played a key role in shaping new trends such as miniskirts. Women were rebelling against the status quo and away from the calf-length skirts they wore in the 1950s.
Now we will transition to the 1970s. During this decade, more women were working than ever before, and this largely impacted the fashion of the era. As women became more involved in the workforce, they began to wear clothes that were typically considered masculine. For example, full-length pants such as gauchos and bell-bottom jeans grew in popularity. In addition, after incidents such as Watergate and the Pentagon Papers, the American people generally lost faith in the federal government. This loss of trust led to a general sense of rebelliousness in the people, reflected by the adornment of clothes starkly different to that from the previous decade. The hippie fashion shows the public's deviation from the prim and proper styles of the 60s. As the 1980s rolled around, the nation experienced an economic boom. This boom resulted in a divergence of the American people towards materialistic values. This is seen through the emergence of bright, flashy clothing meant to bring attention to oneself. In addition, the value that American society placed upon athletics became clear through fashion in this era. The company Nike became very popular as it teamed with Michael Jordan and created the label Air Jordan 1 in 1985. This alliance quickly expanded Nike's production, securing it as a successful and well-known athletics brand. Finally, as the existence of women in the workplace became more normalized, women began to push for gender equality in their professional lives, resulting in a surge of power suits. The 1990s are known for their minimalistic fashion styles. The excessive culture of the 80s diffused into the new era, which had a more moderate appeal. Moreover, the rise of grunge music, popularized in the great city of Seattle, produced a new style of disheveled clothing. In addition, during the 90s, luxury brands began to form diffusion brands in order to protect their signature styles. Ready-to-wear brands had begun to copy larger labels. In order to maintain their looks, the luxury brands started to mimic their own styles with cheaper fabrics in order to continue to maintain a monopoly over their own styles. For example, Prada's diffusion brand is Miu Miu, while Ralph Lauren's diffusion brand is Polo and Polo jeans. As American culture changed over the decades, fashion changed with it. If we take the time to examine these trends, we can learn the story of American history.